The prison camp of the Twire Empire was a place where hope came to die. A place built with metal walls, sharp wires, and the screams of those who had already given up. But Marcus Howley refused to be one of them, even as he sat in his cold cell alone, waiting for whatever cruelty the guards had planned next. The air smelled of oil and blood, and every few minutes the distant sound of a whip or a blast echoed down the long halls. But Marcus kept his mind sharp, counting breaths and watching every shadow, ready for the moment when fate would give him a chance to escape. He did not expect the chance to arrive in the form of a small figure shoved through his cell door by two laughing guards. She stumbled, thin and shaking, her bare feet scraping the floor. She was not human, and she was not Twire. Her skin was a pale blue, bruised and cracked in places. Her long silver hair hung in tangled lines down her back, and her eyes, large, bright, and full of fear, darted around the room like she expected another blow to hit her. The guards grinned cruelly as she collapsed against the wall. "A gift for you," one said, laughing. "Something broken. Something useless. A plaything for your last days, human." They slammed the door and walked away, their laughter echoing long after their footsteps faded. Marcus stared at the fragile creature curled in his cell, her thin arms wrapped around her body as she shivered with cold. He knelt slowly, trying not to frighten her, but she flinched the moment he moved toward her. He stopped a few inches away, letting her see his hands were empty. "Hey," he said softly, "I'm not going to hurt you." Her breath came in fast, terrified gasps. She tried to sit up but winced as pain shot through her. Marcus's gut tightened. She had been beaten badly, starved even worse. She would not survive long if she stayed like this. He took off his jacket and gently placed it around her shoulders. At first she stiffened, then her trembling eased a little as the warmth reached her. He checked her pulse. It was small, weak, barely there. "You're freezing," he whispered. "You need rest. You need water." Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time she looked directly at him with a faint glow in her irises that reminded him of stars just before dawn. Her lips parted and she whispered, "Do not waste your strength on me." Her voice was soft and musical, even though pain twisted every word. Marcus almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how wrong she was. "You don't know humans," he said gently. He tore strips of fabric from his shirt to wrap her wounds. He offered her half of his water, even though he needed it just as much. He supported her when she tried to sit up and stayed by her side when she collapsed again. Slowly, very slowly, she began to relax, leaning against him for warmth like a child who had never known safety. When she finally fell asleep, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, Marcus stared at the dim ceiling of his cell and felt something fierce awaken inside him, a promise. She had been thrown at him like garbage, like something meant to entertain him before he died. But Marcus Howley was human. Humans fought for the weak. Humans protected the broken. Humans did not bend to cruelty. He wrapped an arm gently around her small, shaking form and whispered into the cold air, "I'll keep you alive. I swear it." And in that dark prison cell, surrounded by enemies and chains, a small spark of hope was born. 2 days passed inside the cold metal cell, and life returned to the fragile alien girl little by little as Marcus shared his food, water, and warmth with her, even though he barely had enough for himself. But that was the kind of man he was, someone who refused to let anyone die while he still breathed. By the second night, she could sit up without crying out in pain, and she finally whispered her name, Leora, her voice still soft but steadier than before, like a candle fighting against a storm. Marcus asked nothing else from her. He only listened and nodded as she spoke in broken sentences about her people, the Astralum Sestuma, a gentle race who shaped energy with their bodies and lived in floating cities. made of crystal and light until the Twire Empire invaded, destroyed everything, and captured her as the last survivor of her kind. Marcus felt something twist painfully inside his chest as she explained how the Twire used her powers like a tool, draining her light until she grew too weak to resist. And then they tossed her into a cell as a joke, something to laugh about, something to break a human spirit. But instead, they had given Marcus a reason to stand, a reason to fight, and that reason lay right in front of him, leaning on his shoulder as she gathered enough strength to live. He had been studying the guards for days now, watching their routines, their shift changes, the way they grew lazy and bored at night. He had been waiting for a chance to escape, but he would never leave alone, not now, not with Leora fading beside him like a dying star. That chance came suddenly when the ground shuddered beneath them and a deep explosion shook the entire prison camp. The lights flickered wildly. Alarms howled through the halls. Marcus recognized the sound immediately. The Terran resistance was attacking. "This is it," he whispered, lifting Leora into his arms. She clung to his neck, her heart beat fast and frightened. "Are we dying?" she asked. "Not today," he said, pushing the cell door which had unlocked in the chaos. "Hold on." Smoke drifted through the corridors as Marcus ran, dodging panicked prisoners and screaming guards. The walls shook again as more explosions hit the compound. Blaster fire rang out nearby, sharp and violent. Leora held tight, her breath warm against his neck. Her body trembled with every loud noise. Marcus moved fast and low, using shadows and broken walls for cover. He knew this camp well enough from observation to find the exit. But when he reached the outer gate, 3 Twire soldiers jumped in front of him, blocking the escape path with their weapons raised. Marcus had no gun, only fists and pure determination. So he set Leora down behind a fallen metal crate and whispered, "Stay down." Then he charged. The first guard swung his weapon, but Marcus ducked, grabbed his arm, and slammed him into the second guard with enough force to knock both down. The third aimed at Leora. Marcus felt terror punch through him like ice, and he sprinted, knowing he couldn't reach her in time. But before the shot hit, a burst of shining light erupted from Leora's hands, forming a glowing shield that deflected the blast. The energy crackled and blinded the attackers long enough for Marcus to knock out the third guard. Leora collapsed from the effort, her glow fading. Marcus scooped her back into his arms and ran toward the landing area where small ships were kept. With alarms screaming and fire spreading behind him, he climbed into a stolen Twire scout ship, sealed the cockpit, and launched into the sky. As they broke through the clouds into open space, Leora opened her eyes weakly and whispered, "We are free?" Marcus looked at the stars shining far above. "Not yet," he said, "but we will be." The stolen Twire scout ship shot into deep space like a wounded bird running from a fire, its engines shaking and its panels sparking from the rushed launch. But Marcus kept his hands tight on the controls, refusing to let anything slow them down because he knew the Twire would chase them without rest. Leora lay weak in the co-pilot seat beside him, wrapped in a blanket he had scavenged from the prison bay, her breathing soft and uneven, her glow dim like a fading lantern in a dark room. She tried to sit up once, but he gently pressed her back. "Save your strength," he told her. She nodded and closed her eyes, trusting him completely. It was strange how quickly that trust had formed, but maybe it wasn't strange at all. Sometimes broken souls understood each other faster than anyone else. Still, rest did not last long. A warning alarm shrieked through the small cockpit. Marcus leaned forward and swore under his breath as he saw 3 Twire drones closing in behind them. Sleek, fast, and merciless, they locked onto the scout ship with cold precision. "Marcus?" Leora whispered, sensing his fear. "Just a few pests," he said, though his heart pounded harder now. He pushed the ship into a sharp dive toward a nearby field of drifting space rocks. Meteoroid clusters spun lazily, glowing faintly from distant sunlight. Any normal pilot would avoid them. Marcus flew straight in. The drones followed, firing bright lances of plasma that exploded against the rocks, sending shards spiraling everywhere. Marcus twisted the ship between spinning stones, each move powered by instinct and desperation, scraping so close to the rocks that the metal hull screeched. "Hold on," he shouted as he rolled the ship sideways to dodge a blast. One drone crashed into a rock and exploded in a flash of blue fire. Leora watched, eyes wide, gripping the seat with trembling fingers. You fly like you are mad," she whispered. Marcus gave a thin smile. "Maybe I am." The remaining drones tightened their formation, circling the ship like hungry wolves. "Leora," he said, "can you do anything to throw them off?" She shook her head weakly. "My light, it is too weak. I can give only a little." Even a little was enough. She touched the side panel with her trembling hand, and a soft pulse of gold energy flowed outward. The drone trackers flickered, confused. Their aim wavered. Marcus seized the chance and shot the ship upward, bursting out of the meteoroid field and into open space. 2 more drones appeared in front of him. "Of course," he muttered. He dodged the first, shot past the second, and raced into the shadow of a massive, broken moon. Cliffs of dark stone jutted out, sharp and dangerous, but they gave him cover. He slipped between them, forcing the drones to follow in a tighter space. One clipped a jagged rock and blew apart. The last one lined up for a kill shot, but Leora, with a final burst of effort, created a flash of blinding light. The drone missed its target and slammed headfirst into the moon's surface. Silence finally returned. Marcus slowed the ship, breathing hard. Leora slumped back, exhausted. He checked her quickly, still alive, still breathing, but weaker than before. As space stretched quietly around them, Marcus reached over and held her hand gently. "You're doing great," he whispered. "I won't let them take you again." She closed her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. "I believe you," she breathed. But just as peace settled for a moment, Marcus saw something on the scanner that froze his blood, a massive Twire warship emerging from hyperspace, its shadow swallowing the stars behind it. They were caught. Their tiny ship trembled in its gravity wake. Marcus tightened his grip on the controls, jaw set. "If this is where we make our stand," he whispered, "then we make it count." Leora opened her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light. "Then we fight. Together." And the great ship before them charged its cannons, filling the space around them with a deadly red glow. The Twire warship loomed before them like a giant shadow in space, its metal armor dark and cruel, its weapons glowing with deadly red light. And Marcus felt a chill crawl down his spine because he knew their small stolen scout ship was nothing compared to the monster in front of them. Still, he refused to give up. He tightened his hands on the controls and whispered to himself that he had survived worse, even if that was a lie he invented just to stay steady. Leora, pale and exhausted, sat weakly beside him, her faint glow flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. She looked at the huge ship and her eyes filled with fear, not for herself but for him, because she knew what the Twire did to anyone who tried to escape with one of their toys. Marcus leaned closer and said softly, "Stay with me. I'll get us through this," and she nodded even though she could barely keep her head up. The warship released a wave of energy that shook the scout ship so hard the panels almost ripped off, and alarms screamed through the cockpit. Marcus jerked the ship into a dive, avoiding the first blast, but another struck the tail and sent them spinning wildly. Sparks burst from the ceiling, and Leora cried out as she was thrown against her seat. Marcus forced the ship to steady, his teeth gritted, his muscles burning from the strain. "They want us alive," Leora whispered weakly. "They want me back." Marcus shot a hard look at the warship. "They'll have to kill me first," he said, and he meant every word. He darted the ship through the warship's shadow, flying dangerously close to its surface. Twire cannons fired again, and Marcus used the hull plates of the larger ship as cover, weaving through its towers and metal ribs like a pilot who had forgotten he was mortal. But the Twire were not stupid. They released attack drones that swarmed out like metal insects. The drones closed in fast, firing small but deadly shots that bounced off the scout ship's thin shields. Leora lifted a shaking hand toward the window, and a tiny beam of gold light slipped out from her fingers. It hit one drone, confusing its sensors and causing it to crash into another drone. Marcus smiled at her for a heartbeat, proud even in this chaos, then spun the ship to dodge more fire. The warship opened its hangar doors, preparing to capture them with a tractor beam. Marcus felt his chest tighten. If they got caught, there would be no escape, not for him and not for the fragile girl who trusted him. He pushed the engines to their limit, sending the small ship streaking upward in a sharp climb. The engine screamed like it was dying. Leora clutched her chest, panting softly. Her light dimmed even more, and Marcus felt panic rise inside him. He reached over and gently touched her arm. "Hold on for me," he whispered, "just a little longer." She nodded, though tears filled her eyes. The tractor beam fired, a wide blue wave reaching for them. Marcus flipped the ship and shot straight toward the warship's surface, diving low enough that the tractor beam lost its lock. But then the warship fired its main cannon, a blast so bright it lit the entire cockpit. Marcus yanked the controls hard, scraping the ship along a metal ridge. The whole hull screamed in protest. They barely dodged the blast, but the shock wave hit them, sending them tumbling into open space again. The ship was smoking now, shields nearly gone, alarms flashing. Leora tried to speak but slumped forward, her glow fading into almost nothing. Marcus caught her before she fell, his voice trembling with fear as he whispered her name. The warship was charging its cannon again, this time aiming to destroy them fully. Marcus looked from Leora to the deadly light building in the distance and felt something inside him ignite not fear, not anger, but something fierce and unbreakable. "I'm not losing you," he whispered, and he pushed the ship toward the enemy again, ready to fight with everything he had, even if it cost him his life. Marcus saw the main cannon of the Twire warship glowing brighter and brighter like a rising sun of death, and he knew the next blast would destroy them completely. Yet instead of running, he pushed the small scout ship straight toward the danger because he understood, something the Twire never could, that humans did not break when pushed but instead grew sharper, harder, and more willing to do the impossible. He flew low along the warship's surface again, searching with desperate eyes for any weakness, any opening he could use. And then he spotted a thin line of vents near the cannon's base, small and almost hidden, but large enough for something risky and crazy. The idea formed in his mind so fast it felt like instinct. He told Leora to stay awake, to hold on somehow, but she was barely conscious, her light only a faint shimmer now. He reached out and squeezed her hand gently, trying to share his strength with her, and whispered that he would fix everything, she just had to trust him. With shaking breaths, she managed a small nod. Marcus turned back to the controls and slammed the engines to full power, setting a collision course toward the vents. Twire drones swarmed again, firing hard bursts that shook the hull, and Marcus dodged them with movement so sharp and wild the ship groaned like it would tear apart at the seams. He fired the scout ship's tiny guns at the drones, not to destroy them but to scatter them long enough for him to get close to the vent line. The cannon glowed painfully bright behind them, meaning they had only seconds before the final blast. Marcus's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he guided the ship into the narrow gap, metal scraping on both sides, sparks flying, alarms screaming louder than ever. Once inside, he aimed straight down the vent corridor. At the end of it was the cannon's core chamber, a place that could be reached only by maintenance drones not meant for ships. But Marcus had no time for rules. He armed the ship's last explosive charge, a small thing meant for mining or emergency escape, and set a timer. The scout ship burst out of the vent into the cannon chamber, a huge round space filled with bright coils and humming energy. Marcus hovered the ship in the center for only a heartbeat, just long enough to confirm the charge would be close enough to the core to cause a chain reaction. Then he triggered the autopilot, locked the charge into place, scooped Leora into his arms, and ran for the escape pod before the ship could shake itself apart. The escape pod door barely closed when the charge detonated, and a huge explosion tore through the cannon chamber, blowing the entire front of the Twire warship into a cloud of fire and broken metal. The shockwave sent the escape pod spinning away like a leaf in a storm. Marcus held Leora close, shielding her with his body as alarms beeped around them. The pod tumbled wildly until its stabilizers kicked in, slowing the spin and leveling them out. Marcus pressed his forehead against Leora's, hoping to feel some sign of life, and he sensed the faintest warmth from her skin, which gave him a tiny spark of hope. Outside the tiny window, the massive warship cracked in half, flames pouring out as the explosion spread through its systems. For the first time since their escape began, Marcus allowed himself to breathe fully. But the moment was short. Another Twire ship appeared from behind the wreck, larger and more dangerous than the one he had just destroyed, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. Their victory had bought them only a few seconds. He held Leora's fragile body, looked out at the new threat approaching, and whispered that he would keep fighting no matter how many ships came, because he had promised to save her and humans kept their promises even at the edge of death. The escape pod drifted through space like a tiny seed flying past giants as the new Twire flagship rose behind the burning wreck of the first warship, its metal wings opening like claws ready to crush anything that dared survive, and Marcus felt the weight of hopelessness press against his ribs because the pod had no guns, no shields worth mentioning, and almost no fuel left. Yet when he looked down at Leora lying weak in his arms, her light barely glowing under her pale skin, something inside him hardened again and refused to let him give up. The Twire flagship locked onto the pod with a cold blue beam, pulling them toward a docking bay. And Marcus understood this time they did not want capture, they wanted to make an example of them. The beam tightened around the pod, causing the thin shell to creak like it would explode from pressure. Leora's eyes fluttered open, and she whispered faintly that this was her fault, that he should have left her, that humans were not meant to fight enemies like the Twire. Marcus pressed his forehead to hers and told her, in a soft but fierce voice, that she was wrong, that humans survived the impossible not because they were strong, but because they cared about someone enough to keep fighting even when the sky itself tried to kill them. A tear slipped down her cheek as the pod was dragged inside the cold metal hangar of the flagship. The doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the stars. Marcus heard heavy footsteps outside, the hiss of weapons charging, the cruel clicking voices of Twire soldiers preparing to open the pod. He held Leora tighter, whispering that he would not let them take her again. She lifted a trembling hand to touch his face, and for a moment, a soft gold light spread from her palm into his skin, filling him with warmth and strength that felt almost like a final gift. Then the pod door was ripped open, and tall armored Twire soldiers surrounded them, their glowing blades pointed at Marcus's chest. Before they could strike, the entire ship shook as if something massive had slammed into it. A deep roar filled the hangar, louder than anything Marcus had ever heard, and a bright flash lit the walls. Marcus blinked in confusion until he saw a shape he never expected, a human battleship dropping out of cloak. Engines burning bright, cannons firing straight into the Twire flagship's hull. The impact threw the soldiers off balance, and Marcus grabbed one of their fallen blades. With a shout full of rage and fear, he fought like a man possessed, slashing at the soldiers, using every bit of strength the escape pod and Leora's light had given him. He moved fast, wild, and desperate. He fought not to win, but to reach the one small chance that had appeared. More explosions rocked the ship as human marines stormed into the hangar, shouting for survivors. Marcus stumbled forward, carrying Leora in his arms as smoke filled the room. A marine grabbed his shoulder, helping him toward a shuttle while others held off the remaining Twire soldiers. When they reached safety, Marcus collapsed to his knees as medics rushed Leora away. He tried to follow, but exhaustion finally crushed him and darkness closed around his vision. When he woke on the human ship hours later, Leora was beside him. Resting peacefully in a medical bed, her light glowing softly again. The doctor explained that her body was healing, that Marcus had kept her alive long enough for them to save her. Marcus let out a long, shaky breath, relief washing over him so powerfully he almost cried. Outside the window, the broken pieces of the Twire flagship drifted through space as the human battleship sailed forward, victorious. Leora opened her eyes and whispered his name, her voice gentle and full of life. Marcus took her hand, feeling its warmth, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he allowed himself to believe the words he spoke to her softly, that they were safe now, that she was free, and that no matter what came next, he would stand by her, because he had fought death itself to save her and would do it again without fear.